Okay, so get ready because we're going deep on this one, diving into a scenario that's unsettling for sure, but incredibly important to wrap our heads around.
Yeah.
We're going to explore the potential fallout of a nuclear war. And we're using Annie Jacobsen's 2024 book, Nuclear War, a Scenario, as our guide.
Right.
Now, this is not your typical dry, academic analysis.
Oh.
Jacobsen takes a really unique approach. She blends fiction with actual facts and expert insights to paint a picture of what could happen if the unthinkable actually occurred.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this book is how Jacobsen just dives right into the really visceral realities of what a nuclear attack would be like.
Yeah, you're right in the action.
You really feel the weight of these decisions and the consequences.
You're absolutely right, and she starts with a bang, literally.
Yeah.
So picture this, a 1-megaton thermonuclear weapon detonating over Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
Jacobsen describes a scene of absolute chaos. You've got a blinding flash, searing heat, reaching 180 million degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
That's 4 to 5 times hotter than the sun's core.
Right.
It's unimaginable.
A devastating blast wave that levels everything in its path, and then a raging firestorm.
Yeah.
Fueled by exploding gas lines and anything flammable in the blast radius.
It's mind-boggling to even try and picture that level of destruction.
Oh, totally.
But Jacobsen uses those vivid descriptions to really make it hit home that these aren't just abstract concepts we're talking about.
Right.
These are real-world possibilities with consequences that are just devastating.
And it's not just the immediate impact, right?
Right.
Then you've got the mushroom cloud spewing radioactive fallout across the landscape.
Oh, yeah.
Mass casualties, long-term environmental contamination, the potential for societal breakdown.
Oh, yeah.
It's a stark reminder of what's at stake.
And what's unsettling is this scenario is built on actual data and scientific modeling.
Right.
Jacobsen talked to leading experts in nuclear weapons, missile defense emergency preparedness to make sure her account was accurate.
Wow.
So this is not Hollywood fiction.
Right.
This is a terrifyingly realistic depiction of what could actually happen. Exactly. Now, Jacobsen also draws parallels to historical events like the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
But she makes it clear that these modern thermonuclear weapons we're talking about now are exponentially more powerful.
Nice.
Even the first hydrogen bomb, dwarfed the destructive power of those earlier bombs.
That comparison really puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
It just underscores how much more devastating a nuclear conflict would be today.
Oh, absolutely.
And Jacobsen uses this historical context to explore how these increasingly powerful weapons really shaped Cold War nuclear war planning.
Right.
Which still informs how we understand potential scenarios today.
She describes a particularly chilling account of a 1960 U.S. nuclear war planning exercise.
Right.
Can you imagine analysts predicting 275 million casualties in the first hour of a full-scale nuclear attack on the Soviet Union?
Wow.
And another 325 million from fallout in the following months.
What's striking about that exercise is that it includes the deaths of 300 million Chinese citizens.
Wow.
Even though China wasn't even the intended target.
That's incredible.
It really shows you how quickly unintended consequences can spiral out of control in a nuclear war.
Yeah.
Impacting nations far beyond the initial conflict.
That's a domino effect.
Jacobsen even quotes General David M. Shoup, the only dissenter in that meeting.
Oh, wow.
He said, "Any plan that murders 300 million Chinese when it might not even be their war is not a good plan. That is not the American way."
Wow. That's a powerful quote.
Yeah.
It really highlights the ethical dilemmas that come into play
It does.
and how easily things can escalate in these really high-pressure situations.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to Jacobsen's hypothetical scenario, North Korea launching a Hwasong-17 ICBM toward the U.S. East Coast.
Right.
Now, this isn't just a random choice.
What?
The Hwasong-17 is a real missile with the potential range to reach the continental United States.
And what makes North Korea particularly unpredictable is that they use road-mobile launchers.
Right.
Unlike the U.S., which keeps its ICBMs in fixed underground silos.
Right.
North Korea can move their missiles around, making them much harder to track and target.
Oh, yeah.
Imagine trying to hit a moving target in a vast mountainous country.
Very difficult.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of technology transfer.
Okay.
North Korea is suspected of having acquired Russian RD-250 rocket engines, possibly through illicit means,
Wow.
which may have significantly advanced their missile program.
Interesting.
Right. Experts like Ken Posel, an MIT professor emeritus who specializes in missile technology,
Okay.
he believes that these stolen engines allowed North Korea to make a huge leap in their missile capabilities,
Wow.
much faster than anyone anticipated.
So we have a very real and potentially volatile situation.
They do.
Now let's walk through how this scenario might play out. Imagine North Korea launches this Hwasong-17. What happens next?
Well, first, a global network of sensors swings into action.
Okay.
We're talking about space-based infrared systems like SBRs,
Right.
which can detect the heat signature of a missile launch from space. Ground-based radars that track the missile's trajectory, and intelligence hubs like the Aerospace Data Facility in Colorado, where analysts scramble to interpret the incoming data.
So it's a sophisticated system designed to provide early warning of a potential attack.
It is.
But even with all this advanced technology, is there still a risk of human error or technical malfunction?
There's always a risk, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Jacobsen even highlights the 1979 NORAD computer error that nearly led to a false alarm nuclear launch.
Right.
A stark reminder of how fragile these systems can be.
Yeah.
And how quickly things could go wrong.
That story always sends chills down my spine.
I bet.
So as the data comes in and the missile's trajectory is determined, the tension obviously ratchets up.
Oh, yeah.
And we're now in the realm of what's known as the fog of war.
Right.
That chaotic environment of uncertainty where misinterpretations and miscalculations can have catastrophic consequences.
Exactly. The clock is ticking, and decision makers are under immense pressure. Jacobsen takes us inside the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, a hardened nuclear bunker in Colorado,
Okay.
and the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, the PEOC, beneath the White House.
Right.
Imagine the frantic activity as military commanders and government officials grapple with the unthinkable.
Yeah, trying to figure out what to do.
It's a race against time to assess the threat, formulate response options, and ultimately decide how to react,
Right.
all while knowing that the fate of millions hangs in the balance.
Oh my gosh, the weight of that responsibility.
And at the center of it all is the president,
Of course.
facing an unimaginable choice: launch a retaliatory strike or wait for more information.
It's an impossible decision.
Jacobsen describes the nuclear football, the briefcase with the launch codes and options,
Right.
and the black book, the top-secret document outlining potential nuclear targets and strategies.
I can't even imagine.
It's a heavy burden to bear, and Jacobsen emphasizes that most presidents are woefully unprepared for making these kinds of life-or-death decisions.
The weight of that responsibility is almost unbearable to think about.
I know, and in this scenario, the decision window is incredibly short,
How short are we talking?
potentially as little as 6 minutes.
6 minutes.
That's right, and that's where the whole debate about launch on warning policies comes in.
Right.
Imagine having to make a decision about launching nuclear weapons based on just a few minutes of data,
Yeah.
knowing that a mistake could trigger a global catastrophe.
It's terrifying.
The potential for miscalculation is terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
And here's the thing. Even if the U.S. doesn't immediately attribute the attack to Russia,
Okay.
the situation is so volatile that misinterpretations are almost inevitable.
Right, because at that point, it's all about perception, right? It's like one man's retaliatory strike is another man's first strike.
Exactly. Russia has its own complex network of early warning systems.
Right.
Satellites like the Tundra system that constantly scan for missile launches,
Uh-huh.
plus a network of ground-based radars.
So they're going to detect those U.S. missiles rising into the sky.
Oh, absolutely.
And in the heat of the moment, with tensions already at a breaking point,
Right.
there's a very real chance that Russia sees those U.S. missiles as a preemptive attack,
Right.
rather than a response to North Korea.
It's a nightmare scenario, but a plausible one.
Right.
Jacobsen lays out how easily this chain reaction could unfold.
Yeah.
Russia, believing they're under attack, retaliates with their own ICBMs,
Right.
targeting U.S. cities and military installations.
It's chilling to think about the targets they might choose.
It is.
Jacobsen mentions places like the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant in California.
A direct hit on a nuclear power plant like that would be absolutely catastrophic.
Oh my gosh.
We're talking about a potential meltdown, a massive release of radioactive material,
Oh, wow.
and a humanitarian disaster on a scale that's hard to even imagine.
And it wouldn't stop there, right?
No, it wouldn't.
U.S. military bases in Europe and Asia would likely be targets,
Right.
drawing NATO and other allies into the conflict.
This quickly escalates from a regional crisis to a global nuclear war,
Oh, wow.
with major cities and population centers around the world in the crosshairs.
So it's that terrifying domino effect that strategists have been warning about for decades.
It is?
The idea that a limited nuclear exchange could easily spiral out of control,
Exactly.
leading to an all-out global conflict.
But there's another twist that Jacobsen brings into this scenario.
Okay.
something she calls North Korea's wild card.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. What's this wild card?
It's a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse, or a HAMP attack.
Okay.
Basically, they detonate a nuclear weapon high in the atmosphere.
So instead of causing a massive explosion on the ground, they're using the blast to create a different kind of destructive force.
Exactly. A HAMP attack generates an intense electromagnetic pulse that fries electronic circuits across a huge area.
Wow.
Imagine a nationwide blackout, but one that's permanent and affects almost every piece of electronic equipment.
God.
No computers, no phones, no cars, no power grid, nothing.
So Jacobsen paints a chilling picture of what that would mean for the United States.
She does.
She talks about the collapse of critical infrastructure, mass panic, and millions of potential deaths as a result of the ensuing chaos.
Yeah, without electricity, our modern world just grinds to a halt.
Yeah.
We can't get food or water. Hospitals can't function. Communication networks collapse.
Right.
It's a recipe for societal breakdown.
And what's particularly frightening about a Hangeuva attack is that it's a relatively low-tech option.
It is.
A country like North Korea doesn't need a massive arsenal of sophisticated weapons to inflict this kind of damage.
Right.
Just one strategically detonated nuclear weapon could have catastrophic consequences.
That's right.
So Jacobsen's making a really important point here.
She is.
Nuclear war isn't just about the number of warheads a country has.
Right.
It's about how those weapons are used and the potential for unforeseen consequences and cascading effects that could quickly spiral out of control.
Precisely. Now, up until this point, we've been talking about the immediate aftermath of a nuclear exchange. But Jacobsen doesn't stop there.
Okay.
She also takes us further down the timeline,
Okay.
forcing us to confront the long-term consequences of a nuclear war.
Right.
Not just for individual countries, but for humanity and the planet as a whole.
Okay, so if the initial blasts and the societal collapse weren't bad enough,
Right.
what else are we talking about here?
Yeah.
What would a post-nuclear world actually look like?
Well, imagine a world shrouded in perpetual twilight.
Oh, wow.
This is the terrifying reality of nuclear winter.
Okay.
The massive amount of dust and soot thrown into the atmosphere by nuclear explosions
Right.
would block out the sun, leading to a prolonged period of darkness and dramatically colder temperatures.
So not only would the planet be blanketed in radioactive fallout,
Right.
but we'd be facing a global climate catastrophe on top of it.
Exactly. And those effects would be devastating.
Oh, I'm sure.
Think about the implications for agriculture.
Yeah.
Crops would fail, leading to widespread famine.
Oh, gosh.
Entire ecosystems would collapse. And we haven't even touched on the long-term health consequences of radiation exposure.
We're talking about increased rates of cancer, birth defects, and a whole range of genetic mutations that could affect generations to come.
Exactly.
It makes you question whether human civilization could even survive a full-scale nuclear war.
That's the ultimate question that Jacobsen leaves us with.
Yeah.
Are we on a path to self-destruction?
Right.
Will nuclear weapons mark the end of our civilization?
That's a scary thought.
Or will we find a way to avoid this catastrophic fate? Or will we find a way to avoid this catastrophic fate?
It's a pretty bleak picture.
It is.
After going through all of that, it's hard not to feel a sense of dread about the future. But Jacobsen doesn't leave us completely without hope.
Oh.
Towards the end of the book, she brings up an analogy that I found both fascinating and thought-provoking.
You're talking about Göbekli Tepe, right?
Exactly. For those who haven't heard of it, Göbekli Tepe is an archaeological site in Turkey that dates back nearly 12,000 years.
It's considered to be the oldest known monumental temple complex in the world.
And what makes it truly remarkable is that it was intentionally buried by its creators.
Right.
Perhaps as a way to preserve it for future generations.
Like a time capsule.
Yeah.
Right.
Like they were saying, we were here, this is what we accomplished.
Right.
And then they carefully covered it up, leaving it hidden for millennia.
Wow.
Jacobsen uses this as a metaphor for human civilization itself.
I see.
The idea that civilizations rise and fall,
Yeah.
leaving behind traces of their existence, sometimes buried and forgotten.
It's a powerful image.
It is.
And it makes you think about the cyclical nature of history.
Right. Are we just another civilization on the brink of collapse?
Yeah.
Will we be remembered as the ones who destroyed ourselves, their own technology?
Right.
Or will we find a way to break the cycle, to learn from the mistakes of the past and build a more sustainable future?
It's a question that Jacobsen doesn't answer for us.
She doesn't.
She leaves it open, challenging each of us to consider our own role in shaping the future.
And I think that's one of the most valuable aspects of this book.
I agree.
It's not just about presenting a terrifying scenario.
Right.
It's about forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths and to engage in a deeper conversation about the choices we face as a species.
Absolutely.
You know what struck me most throughout this deep dive is just how quickly a nuclear crisis could spiral out of control.
Yeah.
The decision-making window is terrifyingly short, and the potential for miscalculation and escalation is immense.
It's huge.
It's a stark reminder that the peace we often take for granted is incredibly fragile.
Absolutely. And Jacobsen's book serves as a powerful wake-up call.
It does.
It's not about fear-mongering,
Yeah.
but about raising awareness
Yeah.
and encouraging informed dialogue and action.
Great.
We can't afford to be complacent about the nuclear threat.
I completely agree. If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I highly recommend checking out Jacobsen's book, Nuclear War, A Scenario.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And a gripping and thought-provoking read that will stay with you long after you finish it.
Absolutely.
And if you're interested in exploring this topic further, there are many organizations dedicated to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, and a wealth of information available online.
You can also delve deeper into the work of the experts Jacobsen consulted with.
Right.
People like Ted Postel and William Perry, who have dedicated their careers to understanding and mitigating the nuclear threat.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a final question for you to consider.
Okay.
What role will you play in shaping a more peaceful and secure world, a world free from the specter of nuclear war?
It is a question worth asking.
It's a question worth asking ourselves, and one that deserves our urgent attention.
It is a question worth asking.
Yeah, it really is a question worth asking ourselves, and one that deserves our urgent attention. But, after listening to all of this and really diving deep into these scenarios, it can feel kind of hopeless.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah.
You know, like, what can we as individuals really do to prevent something as massive and terrifying as a nuclear war?
Right. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of these global threats.
But I think Jacobsen is actually offering us a glimmer of hope here. It's subtle, but it's there.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
So towards the end of the book, she brings up this analogy that I found both fascinating and thought-provoking.
Are you talking about Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah, exactly. For those who aren't familiar with it, Göbekli Tepe is this archaeological site in Turkey
Right.
that dates back nearly 12,000 years.
It's considered to be the oldest known monumental temple complex in the world.
Yeah.
It's really incredible.
And what makes it so remarkable is that it was intentionally buried by its creators.
They carefully covered it up, leaving it hidden for millennia.
It's almost like a time capsule, right?
Yeah.
Like they were saying, we were here, this is what we accomplished.
Right.
And then they just sealed it away.
It's fascinating.
And Jacobsen uses this as a metaphor for human civilization itself.
Oh, I see.
The idea that civilizations rise and fall,
Right.
leaving behind traces of their existence, sometimes buried and forgotten.
It's a powerful image.
It really is. And it makes you think about the cyclical nature of history.
It does. Are we just another civilization on the brink of collapse?
Yeah. Are we destined to repeat the mistakes of the past?
Will we be remembered as the ones who destroyed ourselves with our own technology?
Or will we find a way to break the cycle?
To learn from those who came before us and build a more sustainable future.
And that's really the question that Jacobsen leaves us with. She doesn't provide any easy answer.
No, she doesn't.
She leaves it open, challenging each of us to consider our own role in shaping the future.
And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from this book.
Yeah.
It's not about giving us a blueprint for survival,
Right.
but about empowering us to ask the hard questions and to engage in meaningful dialogue and action.
You know, one of the things that struck me most during this deep dive is how complex and interconnected all of these issues are.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've been talking about nuclear weapons and missile defense and geopolitics and technology and even ancient history.
Right, it's all connected. And it's clear that there's no simple solution to the nuclear threat.
There isn't. It's going to require a multifaceted approach that involves individuals, governments, and international organizations working together.
Exactly. It's going to take all of us.
And it starts with awareness. We need to educate ourselves about the risks and the potential consequences of nuclear war.
I completely agree. Knowledge is power. And the more we understand about these issues,
Better equipped we'll be to make informed choices and to advocate for change.
So if you're feeling inspired to learn more after listening to this deep dive,
I highly recommend checking out Jacobsen's book, Nuclear War, A Scenario. It's a real eye-opener.
It is. And there are also a ton of resources available online.
Yeah, you can find information from organizations like the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists,
Right, the Union of Concerned Scientists.
the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN.
There are so many great organizations out there doing important work to raise awareness.
And to promote nuclear disarmament.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought. The future isn't predetermined. We have the power to shape it.
We do.
But it's going to require courage. It's going to require commitment. And it's going to require all of us working together to create a more peaceful and secure world for ourselves and for generations to come.